Hello, thought I'd give a quick post-mortem on across the Pacific. On the first video I mentioned I got up to about turn 7 and I've managed to complete the game. Ran it through from turn 7 to 9 and the result was a substantive Allied victory, which is one below the historical victory. For the Allies to gain the historical conditions, they've got to achieve four things. One is to extend an air umbrella from their strategic bombers, the B-24s and B-29s, which extends over the Japanese home islands and stretches back to Hawaii essentially. That's probably the easiest of the four conditions to meet. The second one is that you've got to get a land unit either on Iwo Jima or on Okinawa. That can be tough, especially if you leave it a bit late, as I did. The first attempt was actually on turn 8 to land on Iwo Jima, and that was at the time when the kamikaze aircraft were coming into the order of battle, and the Japanese managed to launch a substantial combined kamikaze stroke level bomber land-based attack against the amphibious task force that was attempting to land on Iwo Jima, and managed to, despite heavy losses against the cap and the flak of the screen, they managed to get through the screen to the core where the transport ships were, and were pretty successful. I think they lost a couple of LSTs with their troops on board, so essentially that left not enough troops to mount a serious invasion on turn 8, so that was aborted. And the second attempt on turn 9 was successful. There is a banzai rule in the game which allows the defender to do a sort of do or die counterattack, which can be very useful on a single hex island where you essentially have a +2 die roll modifier, and although it ensures the destruction of your units, it may be enough to deny a successful invasion. And I think from memory there was about a 1 in 6 chance of that working against Iwo Jima on turn 9, so it wasn't a certainty, and I think with better Allied planning these attempts could have been started earlier than turn 8. So that's the second of the objectives for the historical. The third one is to basically cut off the oil supplies from places like the Dutch East Indies in the southern areas via the resource hex, which is next to Singapore, and have an air umbrella going back to Japan. That one is easier than I thought it was, because actually it's the resource hex in Malaya that is the key. As long as you can cut off that particular focal point, then it doesn't matter whether the Japanese actually control any number of the oil hexes, either in Brunei or Sarong or Palembang. If you can stop the sort of funnel of oil getting through the resource hex, which maybe that's where it was processed, I'm guessing or assuming, then it doesn't matter. And because the American submarines can cut the Japanese air umbrella, if they focus their submarines on the last turn around the resource hex, it seems to be It's not a dead cert because of course there may be Japanese land-based air which are quite effective against submarines, but by about turn 9 there's not so many of those to be had or found spare, so that seems to be a way to try and ensure that particular objective. And the fourth one, which I think is the hardest one to achieve, is to get an Allied ground unit into either Mukden, which is sort of Manchuria, or Seoul, or Shanghai. And it sort of brings me on to the only sort of niggle I've got with the game, which generally is a very favourable feeling towards it, is that the way that the HQ activations work. So you have an interesting dilemma with the Japanese, that you've got your Southern HQ and your China HQ, and you can go the historical route, activate the Southern HQ, do all the historical Pearl Harbor raid and the drive down the sort of Malayan Peninsula and collapse of the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, etc. And then turn 6 you can activate the HQ in China and try and achieve one of the Japanese goals, which is to control all of the airfields in China. And so you've got that incentive, and the fact that they came very close to achieving that. I think they were one airfield short due to some pretty spectacular tie rolling on the last turn. I think there was one airfield still under the control of the communist Chinese forces. But there is a third HQ, the Kwantung, I think it is HQ, which is essentially the HQ that manages the Russian front. So the threat from Mongolia, Manchuria and Russia, where the Russian forces enter the game. Now you can elect to activate this on turn 8 or decide not to, in which case the Allies can force the activation of that front on turn 9. Now, there is no incentive that I can see why the Japanese, unless you've been drinking too much rice wine, would ever choose to activate the HQ on turn 8, because all you're doing is giving the Russians an additional turn to capture one of those objectives. All their forces are mechanised, so they're quite mobile, so they can move, have combat, and do a mech move afterwards. So to give them 2 turns to do that just seems like complete insanity. So I like games that give you a choice, and there's an upside and a downside for making that choice. Which path do we go down? If I do this, I've got some options this way. If I go a different route, I've got some other options, and the game will play out differently. I would never, as the Japanese, choose to activate the Kwantung HQ on turn 8. It's just a complete no-brainer to leave it until turn 9. But it's a bit of a sideshow. The Japanese have to leave enough forces to sensibly screen the objectives, and that's the balance which they're sort of trying to strike. So it's a very small part of the game, but it's a slight niggle, unless I've missed something obvious, which is fairly possible. It wouldn't be the first time, but I've read the rules thoroughly. I've had some correspondence with the designer, Mike, and he's been very gracious in his answers, and I've yet to find a reason why he wouldn't do that. Anyhow, the game overall, really enjoyed it. It's a definite keeper for me. There's nothing else that really does what this does, I think, at this scale. If you like planning operations, I mean, there was a very interesting exercise in New Guinea where there was an American parachute operation that was trying to capture sarong and then failed in the way that the chits came out of the cups. It's quite good for solitaire in that respect. And there's a number of different naval assets. It's not a generic, so many naval points, surface or carrier. This is a fairly detailed order of battle, so much so that someone did put together a very useful sheet on Board Game Geek which summarises the capabilities of the different transport ships, because you've got LCDs, LSDs, transports, the APDs, and some of these units can only be in task groups, some can only be in amphibious task forces, some allow you to do the invasion immediately that the units activate, which is useful because it means there's an opportunity for the for your ships to be hit by enemy air or naval forces before they get to unload their cargoes. So there's lots of little wrinkles there which, if you like planning operations, that give you lots of things to think about. Playing at solitaire is maybe a bit too much to think about to play it in any optimal way, but for me it was never about trying to do a perfect game. It was about trying to understand how the system worked and get a handle on how the various wheels within wheels could operate, and I think I've definitely got there now. So be very keen to play it again with someone else as a live opponent, and I could imagine there would generate some fairly tense gaming moments, which would be quite fun. I don't really know which side is favoured, don't really care. It was just a very good experience to be had, and it gives you a good view of the whole Pacific theatre. What's convinced me that it's one to keep is that I'm already thinking about things that I might try and do differently next time. It struck me that actually you can draw out troops from the quiet theatres and put them either into New Guinea to maybe threaten Port Moresby, or maybe you could collapse the Burma front if you committed to it early in the game, and that would give you another route into China from via the sort of northern via North Burma. So lots of interesting options to think about for next time. So I think I'll leave it there. I'll just take an overview of the map, and then think about what to do next time. Thanks. There's going to be a little bit of glare on this, but there's not a lot I can do about that at the moment. You're looking at Iwo Jima there. So that was the successful landing that the amphibious task force managed to achieve on turn 9. There's a massive amount of Allied cap there which was flying over Iwo Jima to support the operation. The cap came from Saipan. So Saipan is both an anchorage and an airfield, so it's the most important of the Mariana Islands. There was a Japanese task force. They were pretty unlucky in where the chits came out, and their carriers suffered just by getting the timing wrong on a number of occasions, but they were still able to create a task force on the last turn which was trying to protect Okinawa. And the Russian forces have streamed down from the north, and this is the results of one turn of combat. So you can see Seoul, which is there, and and you've got Shanghai just there, So those are the potential targets where you're trying to get your a land unit to occupy those. The other one is Mukden, which is just here, which is the most accessible target. So that's what I mean by why give the Russians 2 turns to take it when you can just give them 1. So the Japanese advance into China was very successful. The one remaining airfield which they failed to take was Yinan, still under the communist occupation, but all the others fell. Even these guys on the last turn, they managed to capture Kunming and Chengdu. Pretty good rolling, but that keeps it fun. The Burma front, the Allies managed to shut that down in the end. They've pushed them right back to Rangoon. There's a couple of Japanese units in Rangoon. And here we are at Singapore. The hex underneath that submarine unit, that SS-8, that is the resource hex in Malaya. So that's the key hex where all of the oil is channeled through. So the fact that the Japanese still control Sarong, which is here, and there is an air umbrella via the flying boat, it doesn't matter, because the resource hex is the key to the whole fuel situation. MacArthur's back in the Philippines. Sorry about the glare there. Come on this side. So you've got the Marines back in Manila, forcing the Japanese out of the Philippines. So that's where we are. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it's been interesting, and we'll see you on the board some other time.